You won't believe the look on their faces when I sprung my trap at their own community meeting. See, I found out the Maple Glen Estates HOA was putting up 88 luxury homes right on the farmland I inherited. But my grandfather's original property surveys? They turned that entire development into my legal property. I honestly never imagined I'd be fighting for land that was already mine. When my grandpa George passed away last April, I inherited his 250-acre farm just outside Oak Valley. That old place had been in our family for generations. Problem was, I lived miles away in the city, tied up with a demanding job that kept me from visiting nearly as much as I should have. Then, my phone shattered the pre-dawn quiet at 7 a.m. on a Wednesday. It was Martha Gable, Grandpa's neighbor for over 40 years. "Ben, they're building houses on your land." Her voice was trembling with outrage. "Huge yellow machines showed up yesterday, digging everything up. You need to get down here, fast." At first, I figured she must be mistaken. Maybe some construction crew accidentally strayed over a property line. But Martha wasn't the type to panic over nothing. The Maple Glen people hammered signs up everywhere. They're planning almost 90 houses right where your East Fields used to be. I jammed clothes into a bag and hit the road to Oak Valley, pushing the speed limit the entire way. 6 hours later, I turned onto the familiar dirt track leading to Grandpa George's farmhouse. But it didn't feel familiar anymore. The usual peace was shattered by the deep rumble of heavy equipment. Billowing clouds of dust hung heavy over the trees. Cresting the hill that overlooked the eastern part of the property, my stomach plummeted. A whole fleet of bulldozers and excavators was ripping into the earth where Grandpa used to grow his prize-winning corn and soybeans. Workers in hard hats swarmed like ants, marking off sections with neon orange paint. A massive sign loomed near the road. Future home of Maple Glen East. 88 luxury homes, starting at $500,000. I parked and walked towards a woman standing slightly apart from the chaos. Despite the dust, she wore immaculate beige trousers and a crisp white blouse. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, and she clutched a clipboard while talking intently on her phone. "Excuse me," I interrupted when she finally ended her call. "What exactly is going on here?" She gave me a slow once-over, like I was some unwanted pest interrupting her important day. "We're preparing the site for residential development." Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. "Eleanor Vance, president of the Maple Glen Estates Homeowners Association." She offered a hand, but there was no warmth in the gesture. "This is my property," I stated flatly, ignoring her hand. "My grandfather, George Carter, owned this farm. He passed away recently, and I inherited it." Eleanor's smile was painted on. It didn't reach her eyes. "There seems to be some misunderstanding. Maple Glen Development acquired this parcel last year. We possess all the required permits and approvals." "That's impossible. My grandfather would never have sold this land." "Perhaps he neglected to inform you." She sounded almost pitying. "The sale was finalized 10 months ago. We've had this expansion planned for years." My head was spinning. Grandpa had been frail in his final months, but his mind was sharp as ever. He wouldn't sell his cherished farm without a word to me. Something felt deeply wrong. "I need to see the paperwork for this supposed sale," I demanded. "You're certainly welcome to contact our legal department," Eleanor said, handing me a sleek business card. "But I can assure you, Mr. Carter, was it? Everything is perfectly legitimate. Now, if you'll excuse me, we're on a tight schedule." She turned her back, already dialing another number. I stood there, feeling utterly powerless as the machines continued to chew up the land that had sustained my family for generations. Back at the farmhouse, Martha Gable waited on the porch swing, a pitcher of iced tea sweating beside her, her face etched with worry. "They started poking around with measuring tapes about 4 months back," she explained. "Your grandpa was fit to be tied. Kept muttering they had no right, that they were trying to pull a fast one." "Did he ever mention selling any part of the farm?" I pressed. "Never. George swore this place would stay in the Carter family forever." Martha's eyes glistened. The day before he went into the hospital that last time, he was rummaging through his old office. Said he needed to find something vital, something to protect the farm. Grandpa's office was exactly as he'd left it. I hadn't had the strength to sort through his things during my brief visit for the funeral. But now I needed answers. The small room smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and aging paper. Bookshelves groaned under the weight of farming almanacs, family albums, and meticulous records spanning decades. Grandpa tracked everything: rainfall, crop yields, tractor repairs, all in his precise, steady hand. Where would he keep property records? The old metal filing cabinet seemed the logical place. Drawer after drawer revealed folders organized by year, but nothing about land sales or Maple Glen. Hours bled into night. My eyes burned from scanning faded ink by the dim glow of a desk lamp. Just as frustration began to set in, my foot brushed against a loose floorboard beneath the heavy oak desk. It shifted slightly. Kneeling, I used a letter opener to carefully pry it up. Tucked into the small, hidden cavity was a sturdy metal box. The key, I discovered, was hanging discreetly from a nail on the underside of the desk. Inside the box lay the original deed to the farm, Grandpa's will clearly naming me as his sole heir, and several yellowed property surveys. But the most electrifying find was a letter addressed to me, in Grandpa's unmistakable script. "Ben," it began, "if you're reading this, it means someone's trying to take what rightfully belongs to us." My hands trembled as I devoured his words. Grandpa detailed how developers had coveted his land for years, pressuring him relentlessly to sell. He'd always refused. In his final months, a representative from Maple Glen had visited repeatedly. The man claimed he just needed a simple signature for a minor road easement, presenting different documents each time. "I never signed away my land," Grandpa wrote emphatically. "If they claim I did, it's a forgery. Look at the original survey from 1910. Compare it to what the county has on file now. The truth is etched in those old boundary lines." I dug deeper into the box and unearthed the 1910 survey. It depicted property lines stretching far beyond what I'd always believed. According to this foundational document, Grandpa's farm wasn't 250 acres, but closer to 320. Sleep was impossible that night. I spread the documents across the worn kitchen table, comparing the ancient survey with more recent maps I found online. A disturbing picture emerged. Over the decades, the eastern boundary line had mysteriously migrated westward, shrinking our property considerably. It wasn't just the area currently under construction. Based on these original papers, we owned land where a portion of the existing Maple Glen development already stood. As dawn broke, my path was clear. First step, lawyer up. Second step, figure out exactly what Eleanor Vance and her HOA cronies were really playing at. If they thought they could swindle my family, they were about to get a very rude awakening. I carefully folded Grandpa's letter and tucked it into my pocket. "I won't let them get away with it, Grandpa," I whispered into the quiet farmhouse. Eleanor Vance had no idea she hadn't just provoked a grieving grandson. She'd stumbled headfirst into a meticulously laid trap, set by a man who'd anticipated her greed even from beyond the grave. Sleep hadn't visited me that night. By 9 a.m., I was pacing outside the office of David Chen, the most respected property lawyer in Oak Valley. His receptionist raised an eyebrow when I requested an emergency consultation, but she managed to fit me in before his lunch break. "So, you're asserting that Maple Glen Estates is constructing homes on land that legally belongs to you?" David asked after I laid out the whole story. He was sharp, attentive, with a calm demeanor that inspired confidence. "These are the original surveys from 1910, updated here in 1979, I explained, spreading the crucial documents across his polished desk. "Now compare them to the current plot maps recorded with the county." David meticulously studied both sets of papers, his finger tracing the boundary lines. His eyebrows climbed steadily higher. "Well, this is certainly irregular," he murmured finally. "According to these historical documents, your property line extends nearly half a mile further east than the current official records indicate. That would encompass not only the new construction site, but also the existing Maple Glen clubhouse and roughly 25 homes built about 5 years ago," I finished, the weight of the discovery settling heavily. David leaned back, removing his glasses and rubbing his temples. "A boundary dispute of this scale is complex, Ben. We need to pinpoint precisely how and when these discrepancies entered the official record." He placed a call to the county assessor's office, putting it on speaker. After navigating a bureaucratic maze, we uncovered something startling. In 1986, a minor adjustment to the eastern boundary was filed, supposedly just a 10-foot easement for utility lines. But then, in 1999, a much more significant alteration appeared, lopping off nearly 70 acres from the Carter farm. The supporting documentation was flimsy, a single form bearing a signature that looked nothing like Grandpa George's meticulous script. He was in the hospital recovering that entire month, I recalled, checking the date against my memory. "Major heart surgery. There's no way he could have signed this." David's expression grew serious. "That strongly suggests fraud, but proving it definitively after all these years presents a challenge." "So, what's our move?" I asked, feeling a surge of determination. "We file for an immediate emergency injunction to halt all construction. Simultaneously, we petitioned the court to recognize the original boundaries based on these historical surveys. We'll need a licensed surveyor to professionally validate these old maps against current landmarks. While David began drafting the emergency filings, I knew I needed more firepower. I drove to the county records office and requested every file they had pertaining to Maple Glen Development Company. Hours later, tucked away in a quiet corner of the archives, surrounded by dusty binders, I struck gold. Maple Glen wasn't just a housing development. It was an intricate network of LLCs and holding companies. The same handful of names kept appearing. Eleanor Vance, her husband Richard Vance, County Commissioner Davies, Planning Board Director Evans, and a couple of others I didn't recognize. But the real bombshell was a document dated just 4 months ago. Approval for an $18 million loan to finance Maple Glen East, explicitly listing the land itself as collateral. My land. I photographed every relevant page with my phone and made my next stop, the Oak Valley Chronicle, our local newspaper. The editor, Sarah Jenkins, had known Grandpa George. When I cautiously explained I was investigating potential fraud involving prominent local figures, her journalistic senses immediately kicked in. I can't print unsubstantiated accusations, she cautioned, but I can definitely start digging into the approval process for this development. It always struck me as unusually swift. Back at the farmhouse, I found Martha Gable chatting on her porch with another longtime resident, Mr. Henderson. When I mentioned Eleanor Vance's name, his face clouded over. That woman. She's the reason I had to sell my place, he said, bitterness lacing his voice. The HOA started finding me constantly for unapproved landscaping. I'd grown those prize-winning roses for 20 years. Then they claimed my little garden shed violated some new rule they'd just invented. The fines piled up until I couldn't afford to stay. How many other folks around here had similar experiences? I asked. At least a dozen longtime residents sold out in the past 5 years. Always below market value. Always to shell companies that, wouldn't you know it, eventually traced back to the Vances and their buddies. A disturbing pattern was emerging. Identify vulnerable landowners, harass them into submission with escalating fines and arbitrary regulations, force them to sell cheap, then flip the land for massive profits through development. My grandfather had been their latest target, but unlike the others, he'd seen them coming. My phone buzzed. It was David Chen. Good news, Ben. The judge granted our emergency injunction, he reported. Construction must cease immediately pending a hearing next week. But prepare yourself, this is likely to get unpleasant. A wave of relief washed over me. I thanked him and hung up. Armed with the court order, I drove back to the construction site. The workers were just packing up as I pulled in. Eleanor's sleek black SUV was still parked near the site trailer. She emerged as I approached, phone pressed to her ear as usual. Her expression hardened when she saw me. Construction stops now, I announced, handing her the official court document. The legal boundaries of this property are under dispute. She snatched the paper and scanned it, her perfect composure finally showing a hairline crack. This is preposterous. We have every necessary approval. Approvals based on fraudulent boundary lines. I have the original surveys. For a fleeting moment, genuine uncertainty flickered in her eyes. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by icy resolve. This little maneuver will cost you dearly, she said, her voice low and menacing. You have absolutely no idea who you're tangling with. Actually, I think I do. 6 key names appearing across dozens of corporate filings. An $18 million loan secured using stolen land as collateral. County officials rubber-stamping approvals for projects they have a hidden financial stake in. I hadn't intended to reveal the extent of my knowledge just yet, but the look of shock on her face was immensely satisfying. Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand clenched her phone so tightly, her knuckles turned white. You are making a grave mistake, she hissed. We can resolve this amicably. Perhaps you'd entertain a generous offer for the remaining farmland. 7 figures, immediate wire transfer. Not interested. Everyone has their price. Her confident, predatory smile returned. Think about it, Ben. You don't even live here anymore. What do you really care about some dusty old farm? This dusty old farm has been in my family for 4 generations. It's not for sale. I turned to walk away, feeling her gaze burning into my back. As I reached my car, she called out, her voice dripping with venom. Commissioner Davies is my husband's golfing buddy. Judge Miller comes to my dinner parties. You think your flimsy injunction will hold? You're a nobody in this town. I drove off, her words echoing ominously. She had a point. I was an outsider now. But she'd overlooked one crucial detail. Grandpa George hadn't been an outsider. He'd spent his entire life in Oak Valley, knew practically everyone, and commanded respect, even from those who occasionally disagreed with him. And he'd left me far more than just land deeds. Back at the farmhouse, I returned to his office. If Grandpa had anticipated this battle, what other preparations might he have made? I began a more thorough search, examining every ledger, every notebook. In an old photo album labeled Community Picnic 2019, I found dozens of snapshots. Grandpa George laughing with neighbors, shaking hands with local business owners, posing with families who'd known him for decades. On the back of each photo, he'd carefully written names. These weren't just faded memories. They were connections. A network of people who might stand with me against the Maple Glen machine. My phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. Parking violation notice at your property. Fine $600. Maple Glen Estates HOA compliance. Attached was a photo of my car parked in Grandpa's driveway, on my own property. So, it begins, I thought. The harassment campaign. Mr. Henderson had described, but unlike the others, I knew their playbook now, and I possessed something they couldn't possibly anticipate. Grandpa George's ultimate ace in the hole, still waiting patiently in his files for the perfect moment to be played. As darkness settled over the farm, I sat on the porch where Grandpa used to spin yarns during my childhood summer visits. The eastern fields lay silent, the construction equipment idled by the court's decree. But this was merely the opening skirmish. Tomorrow, Eleanor would undoubtedly mobilize her influential network. The real war was about to begin. What she failed to grasp was that I'd found more than just property surveys in Grandpa's hidden box. I'd uncovered documents that didn't just challenge the boundary manipulations. They pointed fingers directly at who had falsified them, when they'd done it, and why. Eleanor thought she was dealing with some naive absentee grandson fighting over sentimental dirt. She had no clue she was actually confronting the ghost of my grandfather, a man who had meticulously documented every shady deal and suspicious approval for years, patiently constructing a case while they dismissed him as just a stubborn old farmer. The trap was baited. All I had to do was let them walk right into it. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pushed through the gleaming glass doors of the Maple Glen Estates Community Center. Tonight was the culmination of weeks of planning. Inside, close to 100 residents milled about, filling rows of folding chairs. They buzzed with excitement about proposed tennis courts and upgraded streetlights, sipping punch from flimsy plastic cups. At the front, Eleanor Vance stood poised and confident in a striking red blazer, gesturing towards glossy renderings of sprawling houses projected onto a screen. "And just imagine the resort-style swimming pool with its stunning waterfall feature," she declared, beaming at the assembled homeowners. "Our property values will skyrocket once these beautiful new homes are completed." Applause rippled through the room. A few people even whistled. No one suspected the contents of the folder clutched in my hand were about to detonate their pleasant evening. Taking a steadying breath, I strode purposefully down the center aisle. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice ringing clear enough to make heads swivel. "I need to address the community regarding this development." Eleanor's practiced smile faltered for a microsecond before snapping back into place, tighter and more artificial than before. "We'll have a Q&A session after the presentation concludes." "This issue cannot wait," I countered, stepping up onto the low stage beside her. I turned to face the now curious crowd. "My name is Ben Carter. My grandfather, George Carter, owned the adjacent farm, Carter Hill Farm, for over 60 years. "Ah, yes, the old property we acquired," Eleanor interjected smoothly, trying to regain control. "We're certainly thrilled to finally be developing that rather neglected parcel." A few murmurs of agreement went through the audience. I opened my folder and deliberately pulled out the first document. "This," I announced, holding up the yellowed paper, "is the original land survey from 1910. I paused for effect. "And this is the updated survey from 1979. I held up the second sheet. "According to these legally binding documents, my grandfather's property extends a full 70 acres farther east than what is reflected in the current county records." I pivoted to face the HOA board members, seated in a neat row behind the podium, placing copies of the surveys directly in front of each of them. "To put it plainly," I continued, my voice steady, "you are actively building on land that legally belongs to me. And it's not just the new development site. According to these established boundaries, approximately 25 existing homes in Maple Glen Estates, along with your community clubhouse right here, are situated on my property as well. The room erupted. Voices clashed, people jumped to their feet, a chair clattered over in the commotion. "This is utterly absurd," Eleanor shouted, snatching one of the surveys. "We have permits. We've sold numerous lots. Construction is well underway." I remained calm as her face flushed crimson. "Your permits, Miss Vance, are predicated on inaccurate, potentially fraudulent property lines. I have already filed an emergency injunction with the court to halt all construction immediately." Paul Simmons, the balding HOA treasurer with thick spectacles, was studying the documents with visible, growing alarm. "Eleanor," he whispered, loud enough for the nearby microphone to amplify his words. "These boundary markers, they align with the old creek bed described in the historical records. They look legitimate." She forcefully ripped the papers from his grasp. "This is obviously some elaborate shakedown, a desperate attempt to extort money from this community. We will fight this baseless claim." "You are certainly welcome to try," I replied evenly, drawing out one final, crucial document from my folder. "But perhaps there's something else you should be aware of. According to these same legally recognized boundaries, your personal residence, Eleanor, sits entirely on what is, unequivocally, my land." A stunned silence descended upon the room. People exchanged wide-eyed glances, the full implications suddenly crashing down upon them. 25 families might not actually own the ground beneath their houses. A man near the back stood up, his voice trembling slightly. Are you saying we could lose our homes?" Before I could respond, Eleanor slammed her hand violently on the podium. "This meeting is adjourned. Everyone, please vacate the premises immediately. The board needs to convene privately to address this situation." As people began shuffling out, whispering anxiously amongst themselves, a younger woman with worried eyes touched my arm. "I'm Rachel Winters. My husband and I just poured our entire life savings into a deposit on a lot in the new section. What's going to happen to us?" I hadn't fully anticipated confronting the human collateral damage so directly. "Look, I'm not trying to displace anyone or cause hardship for ordinary families," I told her sincerely. "My goal is simply to rectify a significant wrong that was committed against my family." "Don't listen to a single word he says," Eleanor hissed, suddenly appearing beside us after the room had mostly cleared. She leaned in close, her voice low and venomous. "You have no comprehension of the forces you're messing with. I built Maple Glen Estates from the ground up. No one takes it away from me." Her threat hung heavy in the air as she spun on her heel and stormed out, leaving me alone in the now empty community center. Through the large windows, I could see clusters of anxious homeowners huddled together in the parking lot, their faces illuminated by the streetlights. My phone buzzed. A text from David Chen. "How did it go?" I typed back. "They know. Brace for impact." What I didn't convey was the unease settling in my own gut. I had ignited the fuse, but the impending explosion felt immense and unpredictable. These weren't just lines on a map. They represented people's homes, their security, their dreams. But those dreams had been built upon the foundation of my grandfather's stolen legacy. Someone was inevitably going to lose everything, and I knew Eleanor Vance wouldn't surrender without unleashing every weapon in her arsenal. I was jolted awake by the roar of engines just outside Grandpa George's farmhouse. Blinding spotlights flooded the windows. Stumbling onto the porch, I found 3 imposing white SUVs, emblazoned with Maple Glen security, parked strategically, blocking my entire driveway. Uniformed men stood beside the vehicles, their expressions impassive. One stepped forward, thrusting a thick envelope into my hand. "Cease and desist notification from the Maple Glen Estates Homeowners Association," he stated robotically. "You are hereby ordered to withdraw all legal claims against the development immediately or face significant legal repercussions." I ripped open the envelope. Inside, a formal letter accused me of fabricating documents and attempting extortion. It demanded I compensate the HOA for damages to the community's reputation. "You cannot be serious," I muttered, incredulous. The guard merely shrugged. "Just delivering the message, sir. Have a pleasant day." He rejoined his colleagues, but none of the vehicles made any move to leave. They were clearly settling in. Later, when I attempted to drive into Oak Valley for breakfast, I discovered my exit completely blocked by large, newly placed concrete barriers at the end of the driveway. "Apologies, sir," one of the guards said, his tone devoid of any actual apology. "This access point hasn't received approval from the development's Architectural Review Committee. It's been temporarily closed for safety considerations." I was effectively imprisoned on my own land. A call to the sheriff's office proved fruitless. They cited it as a civil matter and advised me to consult my attorney. Just then, my phone rang. Eleanor Vance's name flashed on the screen. I hadn't given her my number. "Good morning, Ben," she purred when I answered, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Enjoying the rustic scenery?" "This is blatant harassment, Eleanor," I shot back. "You can't legally block access to my property." Actually, according to the official county records, the real ones, that driveway crosses designated Maple Glen common areas. We are well within our rights to regulate access for community safety and integrity. "You know damn well those records are fraudulent," she laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "Allow me to elucidate how things operate in Oak Valley, Ben. Commissioner Davies plays golf with my husband every Sunday morning. The county building inspector? His daughter happens to work for my real estate firm. The supervisor at the water department? A resident of Maple Glen." My stomach twisted into knots as she continued her litany of connections. "By tomorrow afternoon, expect your charmingly dilapidated farmhouse to be cited for no fewer than 15 building code violations. Your water service might experience unexpected interruptions due to necessary maintenance. You'll find local contractors suddenly unavailable. They understand the wisdom of not crossing me." "That's completely illegal," I stated, though my voice lacked conviction. "That's small-town influence, dear," she retorted coolly. "You cannot win this fight. However, I pride myself on being reasonable. Drop these baseless claims, sign over the disputed acreage, and all these inconveniences will simply vanish. I'll even compensate you generously for your trouble." "This was never about money," I told her firmly. "Oh, it's always about money, Ben. Always. Think carefully. You have until tomorrow." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, then at the security SUV still parked ominously outside. They weren't bluffing. True to Eleanor's word, by mid-afternoon, a stern-faced county inspector arrived. He meticulously documented supposed issues with everything: the wiring, outdated; the septic system, potential leakage; the porch railings, unsafe. He handed me a lengthy list of violations requiring thousands of dollars in immediate repairs. As his truck pulled away, another arrived. Workers began erecting more signs along my property line. "Future home of Maple Glen East, luxury living coming soon." My water pressure dwindled to a pathetic trickle. A call to the utility company yielded only vague excuses about ongoing system maintenance, with no estimated time for restoration. I tried ordering pizza for dinner. The driver called, confused, claiming he couldn't locate my address despite countless deliveries in the past. I was being systematically isolated, cut off from the outside world. That night, I sat on the darkened porch, watching the relentless sweep of the security vehicle's spotlight across the fields where Grandpa George had once harvested his crops. The silenced bulldozers loomed in the distance like sleeping beasts, poised to resume their destruction. My phone lit up. A message from David Chen. "They've filed a countersuit alleging your documents are forgeries. Court date scheduled 4 months out. They'll argue to continue construction in the interim." 4 months. By then, the houses would be framed. The landscape irrevocably altered. The damage would be irreversible. I scrolled through my contacts, desperately seeking potential allies. A name jumped out. Sarah Jenkins, the reporter from the Oak Valley Chronicle. We'd been in the same graduating class years ago. I hadn't spoken to her in ages, but perhaps... As I debated calling her, headlights cautiously navigated the long driveway, maneuvering carefully around the concrete obstacles before pulling up near the house. I tensed, bracing for whatever new form of harassment Eleanor had devised. But the figure who stepped out of the car was familiar. Paul Simmons, the anxious HOA treasurer from the community meeting. "I really shouldn't be here," he stammered nervously, casting worried glances towards the distant security SUVs. "If Eleanor ever finds out..." "Why did you come, Paul?" I asked quietly. He slipped a small flash drive from his pocket. "Because what she's doing, it's not right. I've managed the HOA finances for 7 years. There are irregularities, things you need to see." I ushered him inside, away from prying eyes. At my cluttered kitchen table, he plugged the drive into his laptop, revealing spreadsheets, meeting minutes, and damning email chains. "Eleanor and a few board members have been treating the HOA funds like a personal slush fund," he explained, his voice hushed. "Mysterious special fees that vanish without explanation, lucrative contracts consistently awarded to companies owned by her relatives, reserve funds being funneled into risky side businesses." "Why reveal this to me now?" I asked, studying his face. Because I'm not the only homeowner fed up with her iron fist, Paul admitted. Many of us are sick of the arbitrary rules, the constant intimidation, the lack of transparency. When you stood up at that meeting with those property documents, it was the first time I've ever seen genuine fear in her eyes. He pointed to a specific line item on a spreadsheet. Look here, these special assessments from last year. Every single homeowner paid $2,500 for supposed road resurfacing. The actual invoices for the work totaled less than half that amount. The rest evaporated. That's outright theft, I breathed. Paul nodded grimly. And it gets worse. Those 25 homes you mentioned are on your land? The residents there have been complaining about chronic drainage problems for years. Soggy lawns, flooded basements. Eleanor keeps making empty promises about fixes, but nothing ever gets done. Now it makes sense. She likely knew all along those properties might not legally belong to the HOA, so why invest in proper infrastructure? As we spoke, my phone began buzzing repeatedly with texts from numbers I didn't recognize. We stand with you against Eleanor. The Millers, 42 Sunny Pine Lane. She fined us $600 for planting herbs instead of approved flowers. How can we help? Jackson family. Our kids' playground equipment was removed without warning. We want to join your fight. The Rodriguezes. A faint smile touched Paul's lips. I might have discreetly shared your number with a few sympathetic neighbors. For the first time since this ordeal began, a flicker of genuine hope ignited within me. Eleanor wielded power, connections, and money, but in her arrogance she had also cultivated a significant number of enemies. We need a strategy, Paul, I said, leaning forward. And I think I know exactly where to begin. As Paul carefully drove away, navigating past the silent sentinels in their SUVs, I watched a gentle rain begin to fall on the skeletal frames of the half-built houses in the distance. Eleanor thought she was crushing me into submission through isolation and intimidation. Instead, she had inadvertently helped me forge the very alliances I needed to win this war. Tomorrow would mark a shift in tactics. Tomorrow, I would stop playing defense. Grandpa George always used to say, the most effective trap isn't one your enemy simply walks into. It's one they unknowingly help you construct. Eleanor Vance had just handed me the crucial missing pieces. My water was shut off yesterday. The electricity flickered out this morning. I stood in my grandfather's dim kitchen, staring at the spoiling contents of the warming refrigerator. Eleanor Vance thought she could bully me off my rightful land by making my life a living hell. She was sorely mistaken. Grabbing my notebook, I headed out the door. If Eleanor wanted a war, I needed an army. My first stop was Martha Gable's tidy cottage. She answered the door clad in a flowered housecoat, her eyes widening in shock. They cut off your utilities? She gasped. Ben, that's illegal. So is building multi-million-dollar homes on stolen land, I replied grimly. But Eleanor seems to have friends in high places at the county. Martha, I need to know. Who else in Maple Glen despises the HOA as much as we do? Martha's eyes gleamed with righteous indignation. Oh, honey, pull up a chair and grab a notepad. This could take a while. She proceeded to give me a list of 15 names. Families fined exorbitant amounts for having the wrong shade of mailbox paint. Elderly couples threatened with property liens because their visiting grandchildren were deemed too noisy. A single mother unable to afford the $900 fee required to erect a small necessary fence to keep her toddler safe in their own yard. I spent the entire day systematically knocking on doors throughout the sprawling Maple Glen estates. Initially, many residents were hesitant, clearly intimidated. But when I showed them copies of Grandpa George's original property surveys, a palpable shift occurred. Fear began to give way to a flicker of hope. Jessica Jenkins, whose beloved vegetable garden had been forcibly ripped out by HOA decree, invited me inside for lemonade. Eleanor made my husband tear out every single tomato plant because vegetables weren't aesthetically congruent with the neighborhood, she recounted, her hands trembling slightly with lingering anger. We were slapped with a $600 fine. My husband already works 2 jobs just to make ends meet. The Brown family detailed how they'd spent over $3,000 in legal fees fighting the HOA over the installation of a simple porch swing. The Johnsons lamented not being allowed to paint their front door their preferred shade of blue. Every house adhered rigidly to the same monotonous color scheme, beige with white trim. It's not just the ridiculous rules, Trevor Martinez explained, his wife Julia nodding emphatically beside him. It's the selective, arbitrary enforcement. Eleanor personally drives around, snapping photos of supposed violations. Some residents receive warnings, while others get hit with immediate hefty fines. There's absolutely no consistency or fairness. By the time the sun began to dip below the horizon, I had spoken with 30 families, each sharing similar tales of harassment and frustration, all living under the shadow of Eleanor Vance's autocratic rule. I pulled out my phone and dialed my attorney, David Chen. "David, can we legally establish a competing homeowners association?" I asked directly. "On your own property?" "Absolutely, Ben. You have every right," he confirmed. "But what about the existing Maple Glen homes that are technically on my land?" "That," I said, a plan solidifying in my mind, "is where things get particularly interesting. I'm going to need the Maple Glen Community Center for a meeting tomorrow evening." David chuckled. "Eleanor will never grant you permission to use their facility." "She doesn't own it," I reminded him pointedly. "According to my grandfather's surveys, I do." The next day, I printed 200 flyers. "Emergency community meeting. Your home may be at risk." Beneath the headline, I included a simplified map highlighting the disputed property lines based on the original survey. As dusk settled, the Maple Glen Community Center began to fill rapidly, quickly exceeding its official capacity. 97 families crammed inside. People lined the walls and spilled out into the hallway once all the chairs were taken. Eleanor Vance arrived last, imperiously pushing her way through the dense crowd, her face a mask of fury. "This meeting is unauthorized," she declared loudly. "Everyone needs to vacate these premises immediately." Jessica Jenkins, emboldened, stood up from her seat. "Or what, Eleanor? You'll fine us all again? Haven't you taken enough from this community already?" The room erupted in spontaneous, supportive applause. I walked to the front, holding up my hands to request quiet. "I didn't call this meeting to stir up trouble," I began, my voice carrying through the packed room. "I came here because my family's land was stolen. But after speaking with so many of you yesterday, I realized I'm not the only one who has been victimized by this HOA." For the next hour, residents stood up one by one, sharing their personal stories of HOA overreach and abuse. Tears were shed. Voices trembled with long-suppressed emotion and anger. Eleanor remained seated rigidly near the back, her fingers flying furiously across her phone screen. "Here is what I propose," I announced when everyone had had a chance to speak. "We form a new association, the Oak Valley Homeowners Coalition. Together, we will negotiate fair and accurate property lines that respect everyone's rights. We will draft a new community covenant with reasonable rules, transparent financial oversight, and elected, accountable leadership." "You can't do that," Eleanor shouted, jumping to her feet. "These properties are legally bound by contract to the Maple Glen Estates HOA." I held up the original 1910 land survey once more. "Contracts predicated on fraudulent property ownership have questionable validity, Miss Vance. But let me be clear. I am not here to take anyone's home. I am here to fix what is fundamentally broken in this community." The subsequent vote was nearly unanimous. 95 families signed up to join the Oak Valley Homeowners Coalition on the spot. As people filed out, buzzing with renewed energy and a sense of shared purpose, Paul Simmons, the HOA treasurer, approached me discreetly. "There's something else you need to know," he whispered, glancing nervously towards Eleanor, who was watching us intently from across the room. "The HOA's finances, they simply don't add up. Our monthly dues keep increasing, yet our reserve funds are mysteriously shrinking. I've tried to investigate, but Eleanor maintains absolute control over all the bank accounts and financial records." I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Paul, would you be willing to show me those books?" He nodded decisively. "Tomorrow morning, my office." Just then, Eleanor stormed over, jabbing her finger aggressively towards my face. "You have made a catastrophic mistake, Carter. By this time tomorrow, you will profoundly regret ever setting foot in Oak Valley." "Is that a threat, Ms. Vance?" I asked calmly. "It's a guarantee. I have the county commissioner, the chief of police, and Judge Miller himself on speed dial. This pathetic little rebellion of yours ends right now." What she didn't realize was that I had invited Sarah Jenkins, the reporter from the Oak Valley Chronicle, to attend the meeting and sit unobtrusively in the back. Every inflammatory word, every blatant threat had been meticulously recorded. As Eleanor slammed the community center door shut behind her, my phone buzzed. A text from David Chen. "Environmental survey results are in. Ben, You are not going to believe what they found on that contested land. A slow smile spread across my face. Eleanor thought she held all the cards, wielded all the power. But Grandpa George always maintained that the truth was the most potent weapon of all. And tomorrow, the unvarnished truth about the Maple Glen Estates HOA was going to be front-page news. I woke to the flashing lights of police cruisers surrounding Grandpa George's farmhouse. Peering through the window, I saw Eleanor Vance standing beside a tall, uniformed officer, presumably the chief she'd boasted about. Time to face the music. Mr. Carter, you are currently trespassing on private property, the police chief announced sternly as I opened the front door. I offered a calm smile. Actually, Chief Riley, I believe you'll find that I am the legal owner of this property. I handed him a prepared folder containing copies of the original land surveys, Grandpa George's deed, and the court injunction. These documents haven't been officially verified, Eleanor snapped, her voice sharp with anxiety. They have, as a matter of fact. A woman I didn't recognize stepped forward from an unmarked sedan parked nearby. Jennifer Mitchell, County Records Supervisor. We retrieved the original microfilmed surveys late last night following the receipt of some concerning reports regarding potential discrepancies. Eleanor's face visibly blanched. What reports? Perhaps we could continue this discussion inside? The coffee just finished brewing, I suggested, gesturing towards the farmhouse. 15 minutes later, an unlikely assembly gathered around my grandfather's sturdy kitchen table. Police Chief Riley, County Records, Supervisor Jennifer Mitchell, my attorney David Chen, and Eleanor Vance, whose impeccably applied makeup couldn't quite conceal the rising tide of panic in her eyes. The original property boundaries were indeed improperly recorded back in 1973, Jennifer Mitchell explained, carefully spreading out historical maps alongside current ones. Based on the foundational surveys and subsequent title transfers, this entire parcel, including the existing Maple Glen homes within the disputed zone and the entirety of the new construction site, legally belongs to the Carter estate. Chief Riley let out a low whistle. That's one hell of an administrative error. We believe it was no error, Chief, David Chen interjected quietly but firmly. We have substantial evidence suggesting the boundary alteration was intentional and fraudulent. Ridiculous, Eleanor slammed her hand flat on the table. This is nothing but a calculated scam to extort money from hardworking, innocent homeowners. Speaking of money, I said, sliding another folder across the table towards the police chief. Paul Simmons, the HOA treasurer, provided these financial records yesterday. They detail the last 3 years of Maple Glen HOA accounts. As Chief Riley began flipping through the pages, spreadsheets detailing income, expenses, and transfers, his expression grew increasingly grim. Miss Vance, he said, looking up sharply. Can you explain why $485,000 in homeowner dues appears to have been transferred to an entity called Sunshine Consulting LLC? That's our contracted management company. Perfectly legitimate, she replied, her voice tight. A company registered to your son-in-law, I added pointedly. Along with 4 other vendors that bill the HOA exorbitant fees for basic services, landscaping, security patrols, pool maintenance, even routine legal counsel, all flowing directly to businesses owned by your immediate family members. Chief Riley decisively closed the folder. Ms. Vance, I'm going to need you to accompany me down to the station to discuss these findings further. This is utterly absurd. Do you have any idea who I am? My husband golfs with Judge Miller every Sunday. Eleanor protested vehemently, but her threats now rang hollow. As the chief escorted a sputtering Eleanor out of the farmhouse, Jennifer Mitchell turned to me, her expression serious. What happens now, Mr. Carter? To all those people living in those houses? I have absolutely no intention of evicting anyone, I assured her sincerely. My priority is ensuring the illegal construction stops immediately, especially now that we know about the protected wetlands. By that afternoon, all construction activity on Maple Glen East had ceased completely. Local news vans were parked along the road leading to the farmhouse. My phone rang incessantly with calls from anxious homeowners. Recognizing the need for immediate clarity, I arranged an emergency town hall meeting for that evening. The Oak Valley High School auditorium was the only venue large enough to accommodate the crowd. Nearly 450 people packed the room. Existing Maple Glen residents, suddenly unemployed construction workers, concerned county officials, and curious townsfolk. The air crackled with a volatile mixture of fear, anger, and uncertainty. Taking a deep breath, I stepped up to the podium microphone. My name is Ben Carter. This land belonged to my grandfather, George Carter. I didn't come to Oak Valley seeking conflict. I came simply to honor his memory and protect his legacy. My words were immediately drowned out by shouts from the audience. What about our homes? We'll sue you. My entire life savings is tied up in that house. I raised my hands, appealing for calm. Please, hear me out. I am not here to take anything from any of you. In fact, I want to propose a solution that I believe can benefit everyone involved. A tense quiet settled over the auditorium. I continued. First, every existing homeowner currently residing within the disputed boundaries will receive a clear, legally sound deed to their property. No one will lose their home. A wave of audible relief washed through the crowd. Second, the proposed new development will be fundamentally redesigned to preserve and protect the vital wetlands my grandfather cherished. These aren't just marshy areas. They are critical natural habitats and provide essential flood protection for this entire region. I clicked to the next slide, displaying copies of Grandpa George's own decades-old environmental studies. These wetlands are documented habitats for 3 federally protected endangered species. Building on them isn't just morally wrong, it's illegal. A man stood up, his face etched with worry. I put down a significant deposit on a lot in the news section, my retirement savings. What happens to my investment now? That's a fair and important question, I acknowledged. We are establishing a property exchange program. Anyone who purchased a lot within the newly designated protected wetland area will be offered the opportunity to swap for an equivalent lot within the redesigned, environmentally sensitive development plan. No one will lose their initial investment. For the next hour, I outlined my vision. A community that harmonized housing with nature, governed transparently, with reasonable rules and fair assessments dedicated solely to community improvements. Towards the end of the Q&A session, Jessica Jenkins approached the microphone. I've lived under Eleanor Vance's rules for 8 long years, she said, her voice clear and strong. I wasn't allowed to paint my own front door blue. I couldn't grow tomatoes in my own yard. My children weren't allowed to play outside after 7 p.m. because their laughter supposedly violated the noise ordinance. She looked out across the packed auditorium. Is that truly the kind of community any of us want to live in? By the time the meeting concluded, we had collected over 350 signatures supporting the formation of the new Oak Valley Community Association. Even some of Eleanor's former board allies pledged their support, including Paul Simmons, who publicly agreed to help unravel the HOA's tangled finances. The subsequent 6 months were challenging. Eleanor hired a team of aggressive, high-priced lawyers who employed every legal maneuver imaginable to overturn our claims and discredit the historical surveys. But the evidence, the surveys, the financial records, the environmental reports, was simply too compelling. Facing multiple fraud charges, Eleanor eventually accepted a plea deal. Today, 1 year later, I'm sitting on my grandfather's familiar porch swing, watching neighborhood kids ride their bikes past houses painted in a vibrant spectrum of colors. The community garden, where Jessica Jenkins's tomato plants now grow tall and laden with fruit, is a hub of activity, with neighbors sharing gardening tips and laughter. Behind me, Grandpa George's farmhouse has been lovingly restored and now serves as our community center, hosting classes, meetings, potlucks, and celebrations daily. The precious wetlands are permanently protected by a conservation easement, crisscrossed by boardwalk trails with educational signs detailing the unique flora and fauna Grandpa fought so hard to preserve. Martha Gable joins me on the porch, handing me a tall glass of lemonade. Your grandfather, she says softly, her eyes twinkling, would be absolutely bursting with pride. She gestures towards the redesigned development where construction has finally, thoughtfully resumed. Smaller, energy-efficient homes clustered to maximize green space, solar panels gleaming on every rooftop. I found something else while cleaning out his study last week, I tell her, pulling out a faded, leather-bound notebook. It's Grandpa's journal from 30 years ago. Turns out, he fought off the original developers back then too, the first time they tried to drain and build on these very wetlands. Martha smiles knowingly. He always did say you were cut from the same cloth, stubborn as a mule when it comes to fighting for what's right. In the distance, a majestic blue heron lifts gracefully from the protected marsh, soaring high above the homes where people are now learning to live in harmony with the land, not just on it. Sometimes I reflect, the best trap isn't about catching someone in the act of doing wrong. It's about illuminating a better path forward, A way to do right. Eleanor Vance and her HOA tried to steal my inheritance, but in their greed and arrogance, they inadvertently gave me, and this entire community, something far more valuable.